Bow your heads, please.
Thank you, God, for this day. Thank you that we can be here together. Thank you for the last 2 weeks of feed that we have, Lord, and that we can keep biology in our lives until college, and that Miss Freitas can teach such a good lesson today on reptiles, and that we have a good rest of the day. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, guys, we're going to go through this quickly so we have time because we have a lot of stuff we need to cover today. So for physiology, you should have said something about the study of life processes in an organism. For nastic movement, something about the plants responding in a pre-programmed fashion. Okay, so not directed by stimuli, but a pre-programmed fashion. Pore spaces is basically the holes in the soil, okay, that water and air can get in. Translocation was movement through the phloem. So you could have said movement down and around, but movement through the phloem would be translocation. Gravitropism is a growth response to gravity. Imperfect flower is one that doesn't have both the carpel and the stamen, so it's got one or the other, something like that. Okay, number 2, it said name the 4 processes for which plants require water, and that would be photosynthesis, turgor pressure, hydrolysis, and transport. Number 3, if plants lose control of its stomata and they remain closed, will substances still flow through the xylem? That would be no, they will not. Excuse me, yeah, I was right, no, they will not. I got it, really, I do. Okay, and then number 4, it says if a plant loses control of its stomata and they remain closed, will substances still flow through the phloem? And the answer to that one is yes, they would still flow through the phloem for a while at least. Number 5, a biologist has a sample of fluid that came from a plant. It is composed mostly of organic materials. Did it come from the xylem or the phloem? That would be the phloem. Number 6, because it's talking about sugars and stuff like that. Number 6, if an insectivorous plant cannot catch any insects, will it starve to death? No, it will not. Remember, it photosynthesizes. It just uses it like fertilizer. Number 7, a gardener has 2 genetically identical plants. If one is the offspring of the other, did the parent propagate sexually or vegetatively? If they're identical, it would be vegetatively. Okay, number 8, A is ovules, B is anther, C is sepals, and D is petal. Wow, that's kind of odd that they picked those parts to identify. Didn't you think so? With all that other stuff, and they picked the petals and the sepals instead of all those reproductive parts that I'd have picked? Anyway, okay. Let's see. Number 9, match the following structures with the correct function. And so I'm just for speed, I'm going to do it this way. 9, anther is B, forms and releases pollen. 10, the answer is C, holds the embryo sacs. 11, the answer is D, catches the pollen. And 12, the sepals are A, protects the sexual organs as they form. Okay. Number 13, what function do the cotyledon perform before germination? They feed the embryo. Somehow, something about provide nutrients for the embryo. Did anybody put the seed leaf? That'd be after germination, so that's a moot point, right? Okay. Number 14, what is the purpose of a fruit? It's actually to move the seed away from the parent plant. 15, name at least 3 ways in which pollen is transferred from the stamen of a flower to the carpel of another. Boy, you could go a bunch of ways here. You could have said wind, you could have named bees, or moths, or butterflies, or birds, or people bumping into them. No, you know. So you had to come up with 3 different things, okay? And here they said wind, bees, beetles, birds, moths, butterflies, bats, right? Okay. Anyway, all right, so that was number 15. Number 16, which has more cells prior to fertilization, a pollen grain or an embryo sac? That would definitely be the embryo sac, wouldn't it? Because there's 7 of those, 8 nuclei in an embryo sac, but there's only 3 in the pollen grain, right? It's definitely the embryo sac. Number 17, when an embryo sac is fertilized, which cell is not diploid? The zygote or the endosperm? You tell me. Endosperm, that's right. And so each answer is worth 3 points apiece. So every answer on the test is worth 3 points. Subtract from 100. Thank you. Okay, let's put that away. We are starting our last module. You are almost done with biology. Stupid it! Right? Yay! Okay. So today we're really going to spend a lot of time on reptiles. So we're looking at class Reptilia. Remember, we're in Kingdom Animalia, Phylum Chordata, and now we're in class Reptilia. And there's a list there that you're supposed to know because you know how they are on these tests. There's a list there of the things that all reptiles have in common. And so reptiles are covered with tough, dry scales, as opposed to fish that had a mucousy covering over its scales, didn't it? So it was slicker. Reptiles have a drier, and I'd let everybody feel my little dead skink, but probably freak people out, huh? So reptiles have dry scales. They are ectothermic. What does that mean, that they're ectothermic? Cold-blooded, very good. They cannot internally regulate their temperature, so they have to actually allow their temperature to be regulated by external environmental conditions. We'll come back to that. 3, they breathe with lungs throughout their lives. They don't have gills at part of their life like an amphibian did or anything like that. Number 4, they have a 3-chambered heart with a partially divided ventricle. We're going to go over all these in just a minute, but these are the ones that are listed there. Number 5, they are most of them produce amniotic eggs with a leathery shell. There are some exceptions. Some of them are oviviparous. Most of them are oviparous, which means they lay eggs, but I think we've already discussed before that rattlesnakes actually have live born. So those are oviviparous, where they actually keep the eggs inside, and then when they hatch, they come out alive, but they actually were in eggs inside. They were not attached by a placenta to their mother. Okay? And so that is the case with some reptiles. And so let's look at each of these individually for a minute. First, we said that they have scales. And so I tried to get a close-up picture so that you could see what the scales look like on a reptile. And they're different depending on where they are on the body. I also want you to notice, because I didn't get this picture for later, what is that on that lizard? That's an ear. And we're going to see that snakes don't have ears, do they? But lizards do. And so he's got an ear there, which kind of is just a hole for a lizard, isn't it? He's got nostrils. He's got eyelids. I know you might think, why is she pointing that stuff out? Well, because snakes have nostrils, but they don't have eyelids, do they? And they don't have ears. So there really are some inherent differences. We may come back to that picture later. Anyway, tell me a purpose of the scales. You guys tell me. You did this reading. Why are the scales on a reptile important? Okay, protection. They keep in water so that they don't dehydrate, right? And then it gave us one other thing, one other reason that their scales were helpful. Exactly. It helps them to stay insulated, doesn't it? So that once they get the heat in, that they don't just lose the heat right away. And so the scales are very important on a reptile. But scales, when they grow, they actually have to shed, don't they? Because the scales aren't like our skin. Shoot, who we kidding? Our skin sheds. Every time you take a shower, you're washing off dead skin. But it's not like in sheets like you see on a reptile, okay? And so reptiles also are ectothermic. We said they can't regulate their body heat from the inside, and therefore they have to regulate it environmentally. So you will regularly in Florida here in the mornings, and most of the year, see the turtles and the alligators out sunning themselves to warm up. But in the heat of the day, the iguanas, you guys see the iguanas, right? They'll get out there early in the day and they'll get out there and lay around on rocks and stuff or limbs because they're warming up. And then once the heat of the day comes, they disappear, don't they? Because if they stay out in the heat of the day, they can get too hot because they can't regulate their body temperature. Think about us. If it's cold, our body is warming us from the inside. That's why we would shiver at times, because the shivering actually creates more heat. Whereas if it's hot, what do? We sweat, don't we? Because our body's trying to cool itself down. So our body has actually got internal mechanisms to regulate our body temperature. These guys don't. And so they have to be very careful to be out when they need to be and be hiding in a hole someplace when they need to be. On the way here, my daughter commented to me, she was with me this week, and she commented to me, look at the iguanas laying up under the overpass. And there were several big iguanas under the overpass because it was the heat of the day, and they were in there cooling themselves off because they can't be out in that heat at that time because they're ectothermic. Okay, excuse me. Up there's my peeling picture. He has to shed his skin, and I've only noticed lizards shedding their skin recently. I'm sure I've seen it all my life and never noticed it before, but recently I've noticed that the lizards that are outside our windows all the time, I've noticed some of them shedding, and they'll stand around because they're trying to get that skin off of them, and they look really funny when they do. But anyway, now with snakes, it's not so funny because when a snake is they call them the dog days, which is actually in the late summer, early fall, and the snakes will be blind because they'll be shedding, and they get very pugnacious during that time, which means they bite at everything because they can't see, and so they're striking at everything. And I think they called it the dog days because so many hunters lost their dogs to being bitten by snakes, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so this can be a problem when a snake does it because he actually can be a little blind. All reptiles breathe with lungs all their lives. That means even if you have marine reptiles, they have to come to the top to breathe air. They do not have gills. They do not breathe through their mouth. They do not breathe through their skin like we saw with the frogs. They actually have to come up and take a breath and then go down. And that includes sea snakes, and that includes sea turtles. All reptiles breathe. That includes alligators, crocodiles. They have to come up because they breathe with lungs, okay? They have a 3-chambered heart with a partially divided ventricle. Remember with the fish, there was just the atrium where the blood was received and the ventricle where the blood was squeezed back out. And then we saw with the amphibian, there were 2 atria and 1 ventricle, which was very confusing. I don't know why God designed things this way. Here, we actually see the same basic pattern, only now the ventricle is partially divided, and I'm really not sure why, but I want to point out something. In the next part of this chapter, you're going to see that that birds and people, mammals, we have 4-chambered hearts. This finally is completely closed off so that there's 2 atria and 2 ventricle, okay? So what an evolutionist sees is they see the process of evolution in these hearts. See, they think that fish turned into amphibians. Here, I'll make you a cute little froggy face. How's that? There we go. There's my frog. Okay, there he is. Hello. Okay. Fish turned into frogs, which turned into lizards or reptiles. Oh, I hate drawing all this stuff here. Let's make him a little alligator-looking guy. How's that? Okay. And then those turned into birds. Okay, that's how an evolutionist would believe things went along there. And they would support this with the hearts. They would say you have a 2-chambered heart here, and then that evolved into a 3-chambered heart, and then that evolved into a 3.5-chambered heart, and then that evolved into a 4-chambered heart. That's how an evolutionist sees it. I just want you to be aware of this because you will run into this again. Okay? So that is how they actually see this. Now, what part do we need to know? Well, we need to know what the actual science is, which is for some reason, reptiles have a 3-chambered heart with a partially separated ventricle. I don't know why. I haven't been able to find out why that is a superior design feature. Just like I haven't been able to find out why a 3-chambered heart, I can understand that one a little more. The 3-chambered heart with because remember you had the oxygenated blood actually mixing with the deoxygenated blood in the amphibian's heart. And I could almost understand that a little better because they have so many different ways to respire. They could breathe through their mouth, through their skin, you know, all these different ways. So maybe it's not as important that all their blood be oxygenated and separated. Not sure what's going on here with the reptiles. I'm sure there's some real good design reason why it's this way, but I'm not sure what it is. And I don't think it's a mutation, and I say that because it's in all reptiles. You know, if it was a mutation, we'd see it like in certain kinds of reptiles. But it's not, it's in all reptiles. So it's got to be some kind of weird design feature. Someday I'm going to find out what it is. Anyway, okay, so I want to at least explain that to you. And then we get to, they lay eggs. And they lay a leathery shelled egg. Now, why do we say that? Well, you guys have all broken a chicken egg or at some point in time to make scrambled eggs, or you want Easter egg and broken egg. I don't know. At some point, even if you're a vegan, you've touched a chicken egg, okay? And you know that the eggshell is crunchy, right? Not so with a reptile egg. If you find a reptile egg in your backyard, you will know it. It's a turtle egg or a lizard egg because it's squeezes. It's kind of like a ball. It gives. It's got a leathery shell to it. It's not got the calcium carbonate in it to make it crunchy. Instead, it's leathery. Okay, so next time you find an egg in your backyard, first off, you may want to put it back. But but if it's crunchy, then you know it's a bird. And if it's leathery, then you know it's a reptile. Yes?
Should probably look around and see if the mom.
Yeah, look around and see if you're in trouble. That's true. That's true because some of them actually do protect their nests. So, especially alligators, you don't want to be in that situation. We'll come back to that. I have pictures. Okay, and it told us that the amniotic egg is very different than the fish eggs. These are your fish eggs. Because the fish eggs, when you have an amniotic egg, is actually a terrestrial egg. It's an egg that God designed for land animals because it's a little self-sufficient condo for the baby to grow in, right? It's got its own little place to live, its own little habitat going on there. That's what I meant by condo, if you didn't know. And whereas the fish eggs are in the water, so they're gelatinous, you know, and they've got fluid going in and out all the time. The amniotic egg, not so, because it's in a terrestrial situation. So if you go ahead and, if you're not there yet, turn to page 496, and it defines for us the amniotic egg. So if we were to cross-section an egg, okay, there's your comparison between the amniotic egg and the more gelatinous egg, like an amphibian egg or let's call it an aquatic egg, okay? So that whether that be an amphibian or a fish, you can see there's a pronounced difference between the land egg, the terrestrial egg, and the aquatic egg, can't you? Okay, so there's your comparison. The amniotic egg, it defines it as a shelled water-retaining egg that allows reptiles, birds, and certain mammal embryos to develop on land. So we can think of an amniotic egg as a terrestrial egg, can't we? A land egg. Can we define it as a land egg? And then from there, you should be able to open the file in your mind. Well, a land egg would need to retain water. It would have to, you know, have some things that were different, right? And run through them in your mind. Okay, now when we look at the amniotic egg, and this is that next picture there, we need to know the different parts. There is internal fertilization when you have this type of egg. And the shell is porous enough to let in gas, but not porous enough to let out water. That's a trick, isn't it? Think about it. You're talking about two very small molecules. Water is a very small molecule, an oxygen with two hydrogens. I know it looks like Mickey Mouse, don't go there. Whereas the oxygen molecule would just be two oxygens attached to each other. And yet the oxygen, the gas, can go through it, but the water can't. It's pretty interesting if you think about it, okay? You know, I wonder if it's got more to do with the polarity of the molecule than the size. Because The oxygen is purely covalent. You guys that took physical science, you learned about covalent molecules, and that was where there was an uneven sharing of the electrons, and therefore there was a slight charge built up on the molecules. You remember that? Okay. And I wonder if it's got to do with the fact that water is polar, and therefore it's got a slight charge to it over the molecule, whereas oxygen's not. It's purely covalent, so there's no charge. And I wonder if that's why, because if just looking at those two molecules, the oxygen should be larger than the water molecule. So if it's strictly size, I don't understand why the water can't get out, but the gases can.
Maybe there's something in the egg that attracts the polar molecules.
Yeah, maybe. Or, you know what else? It could be the surface tension, water, the cohesiveness of water, which you guys just learned about, and that the water holds the other water molecules together, and it's in a liquid form, whereas the gases are already in a gas form, so there's more energy involved. I wonder what it is. I'm going to have to look into that. Anyway, okay, so the water can't get out. We can sit here and hypothesize all day. The water can't get out, but the gases can get in and out as they need to. Remember, it needs oxygen to come in. It needs to excrete carbon dioxide, doesn't it? It needs to excrete waste products. And so the shell allows for that to happen. There's 4 membranes that actually develop in there. There is the amnion, which is the part, here, back here. I'm not sure if all these are on here, so let's see if we can find it. Yep, there it is. The amnion right here. And there's the amniotic membrane, and that grows around the embryo being the little critter, whatever the critter is. It grows, because we looked at an embryonic plant last time, didn't we? So it's just a baby, whatever, not just a critter. Embryo is just a baby. So the amnion grows around the embryo and makes a fluid-filled sac so that the embryo can float in it because it protects it. It's like shock absorption. And I'm going to tell you right now, a pregnant lady, the baby is surrounded by amniotic fluid. And if you get an amniocentesis, they're checking the amniotic fluid for the DNA, and they're going to make a karyotype so they can look at the DNA. When a lady breaks her water before she has, in the process of having the baby, the water they're talking about is the amniotic fluid. I just want you to get this in your mind, okay? So the amniotic fluid is surrounding the embryo to protect it, kind of like a shock absorber, okay? And then the next one, let's look at the yolk. What's the yolk for? You tell me, besides eating, because it's the best tasting part of the egg. We won't go there right now. What's the yolk for if you're a baby, let's say you're a baby turtle. What's the yolk for? Food. Very good. This is its nutrient source. And so then the membrane around that would be the yolk sac. Okay? The next one is the allantois, right here. The allantois. And the allantois's job is that it is a sac of blood vessels, and it takes care of respiration and excretion. So the baby actually breathes through here and gets rid of waste products through the allantois. And then the chorion, which is here. Okay, so that would be this membrane all the way around there. That just covers everything. That's all the book tells us about that. So that just covers everything. Okay, we got that. Now, this part here is the albumin. There's the albumin. And the albumin, wow, it's spelled differently here and in the book. That's interesting. What's the job of the albumin? It's got a very important job. I'm going to tell you one of its jobs. One of its jobs is that it stores water. That's a good thing if you're an egg and you're in there and you can't go for a drink. What's the other thing it does?
Well, you know that it prevents some harmful, say, organisms, for instance, from entering and reaching the, say, the embryo or the yolk.
Okay, and I bet that's what Christian was going to say too, wasn't it?
Say they protect the embryo.
Very good. That's where we're going. See, if gases can get into the shell, so can bacteria. And so if the bacteria or the virus gets into the shell, then the albumin actually has anti-pathogenic characteristics so that it can fight off the bad guys before they get to the embryo. So it is for protection purposes. And I don't know if you realize this, but this is why a chicken egg, if it's out in the chicken yard, it does not have to be refrigerated for something like 3 weeks before it starts to go bad. And the reason is because the albumin will protect it that long. Kong. Okay, so in other countries where my parents told me when they went to Hong Kong, they went on a business trip once to Hong Kong, and my mom was amazed because she said you go in these warehouses, and these warehouses are just eggs stacked to the ceiling, and they're not refrigerated. And I said, well, Mom, they don't have to be, because those eggs will be good for 3 weeks. They have time to get them wherever they need to go without refrigerating them, and that just freaked my mom out. But it's because the albumin protects them for that long. Now, when an egg is rotten, something has happened, and it's gone. It did not develop in the 3 weeks that the albumin was functioning, and therefore you've got a rotten egg. Okay, because it's a real good nutrient source, a lot of sulfur in there in the yolk, and so the bad guys will get in there and munch it out and stink. Nothing like a rotten egg. How many of you have ever smelled a rotten egg before? Makes you want to run, doesn't it? Just like my dog got into a skunk day before yesterday. And as she went running by, I walk with 8 bird dogs in the morning, believe it or not. And when my husband's dog, Badger, went running by, it literally made my eyes hurt. I was like, oh my goodness, you must have like run right up on it and got it right in the face. I felt so sorry for the dog because they have real sensitive noses, and then to be squirted like, oh, she literally made my, every time she ran by me, because they run by me as they go on the walk, every time she'd run by me, I could smell her coming. I'm like, oh, Badger, oh dear. Anyway, okay, did we go over everything? Got the shell, the amniotic fluid, the embryo is the baby, the amnion, yep, we said that was for protection as far as the shock absorption. The allantois was the respiration. We did the chorion, which is kind of covers everything else. The yolk is for food. The yolk sac and closes that. Okay, I think we did everything. So that's your amniotic egg. Excuse me. Okay, let's answer the question 16-1 on page 497. You ready? Ton, ton, ton. Vanessa, you were blindfolded and asked to feel 2 creatures because your sister was trying to torture you. One is a fish. The other is a snake. Ooh. If the first creature feels dry and leathery and the second one feels slimy and rough, which is the fish? First or second? What do you think?
Which one's the fish?
Yeah. Is it the dry and leathery or the slimy and rough?
Well, this phrase, I think I have to go with the second one.
Good, very good. So she's got her sister's number there. Okay. She knows that the fish is the slimy and rough one and the snake is the dry and leathery one. Okay, let's see. If an amniotic egg develops without an allantois, will the embryo live, you guys? Will it? No. And it says why or why not? What happens without the allantois? Good, it'll suffocate. Very good. It will suffocate because it can't breathe and it can't excrete the waste products. So, big trouble. Big trouble. Okay, turn the page. And then 498, 16.3, using X-ray technology, ton, ton, ton. X-ray technology, you observe the inside of an egg as the embryo develops. At the first, the yolk sac and the allantois are the same size, so you cannot tell them apart. After a few days, the one on the left is smaller than the one on the right. Which one is the allantois?
The one on the right.
The one on the right. Remember, the yolk's going to shrink because as it uses it up, the yolk is going to get smaller. But the allantois isn't going to get smaller. It's going to stay the same. 16.4, you have a tadpole and a baby water snake. Wow. I wonder if that would be cute. Baby snake. Anyway, most babies are cute, but I'm not sure about a baby snake. Can either of them drown? Yes. Which one? Snake, the baby snake, because it has to breathe through lungs. It can't be held under there. All right, then we get to classifications in reptilia. And in your picture here, you have an iguana, which you here in Palm Beach County are painfully familiar with. Geckos. We have geckos. You guys have geckos around here, right? Little ones. We have little native geckos. Chameleons. You've seen those before on Budweiser commercials. Okay. Right? I mean, if nothing else, you've seen those Budweiser commercials. I like the horses better, but isn't it the Budweiser commercials that have the chameleon? Who's got the chameleon commercials? Sherwin-Williams?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Somebody used to use chameleons on a commercial years ago, and I can't remember. I don't watch regular TV anymore. Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. Anyway, yeah, Geico uses a gecko Right. I'm not sure. Anyway, it shows you the python, shows you a few other things. It's all good. So let's look at these different orders. Kingdom Found class order. Okay, so we're in Reptilia, we're looking at orders. The first one there is Rhynchocephalia. And Rhynchocephalia are tuatara. That's the only living extant. I'm going to teach you this word today. If something is gone, it's extinct, right? So we would say that most of the dinosaurs are extinct. If something is the opposite of extinct, it's extant. Extant means it is still alive today. Okay, so there is one extant member of Rhynchocephalia, and that extant member is tuatara. Now, I don't know about you. I know he looks like a little bodybuilder iguana to me. That's, you know, doesn't he? Doesn't he look like a little macho iguana? Okay, so I really am not totally aware of why they classify him separately from Squamata, which is where they put the other lizards. I know he's got a very different bite from the previous study that I did, that like his upper jaw goes like this around his lower jaw. So it goes like that. I'm not sure if that's why they say tuatara means spine bearers, and he's got these spines going down his back. But let's be honest, so do iguanas. They've got spines. Now, their spines aren't like this on this end, and maybe that's the difference. Okay, maybe it's got to do with how they are on the back end. I'm not exactly sure. It hit me this week, and I didn't have a chance to go do the research. But that's the tuatara. He's in Rhynchocephalia. He's the only living one. They're in trouble. They're protected outside of New Zealand. The reason they got in trouble was as people started to bring their ships and the rats would jump overboard and swim to these islands, then the rats found a real easy food source eating the eggs, the unattended eggs of the tuatara. The tuatara live about 60 years, if I remember correctly. They don't get sexually mature until they're 20 years old, which means they take a long time before they start reproducing. They lay their eggs and the eggs stay unattended for a year before they hatch. So the rats thought, oh, feast, you know, and they found these unattended eggs, and they're there for a year, so they started eating them, and they started wiping out the tuatara. So what they do in New Zealand is a lot of people are trying to protect them now, and they've tried to move some of them to islands where there are no rats so that they don't all die out, because otherwise they will. The tuatara have a parietal eye, and apparently, from the reading I did, they only have the parietal eye where it's not covered by scales when they're juveniles. This shows you a very young one, and you can actually see the parietal eye. Here it's been covered by scales. This one is a juvenile that's 7 years old. Once again, they're not mature until they're 20. So this one's 7 years old, but the parietal eye has been covered by scales at that point. Now, I'm told by other reptile lovers, so I'm going to refer to y'all as herpetologists because that's what a reptile person is. I'm told that there are other animals, like iguanas have a parietal eye that's covered. Some turtles have a parietal eye. This is not, you know, unique to this guy. This is an eye that is covered by scales, so a lot of people think it's got to do with temperature regulation, because once again, these guys, if they get too long, they're going to cook. You know, and so some people think it's got to do with temperature regulation and helping them to figure out how long to stay outside, or, you know, basically a light sensor. But let's be honest, that's what our eyes do, is light sensor. Problem is, they're not going to work real well if you put scales over them, right? It's just not going to work. Maybe it's a spiritual picture. I didn't even think of that, you know, with the scales, and then they fall off when you come to know Jesus. I'm not sure. Anyway, so the parietal eye. Okay, let's see. We already talked about that. So on 499, 16.5, it says, we assume that the tuatara uses its parietal eye to limit the time that it basks in the sun. Why must it limit the time it basks in the sun? So it doesn't overheat, right? Okay, good. Then, I wanted to show you this, because when I was looking at the tuatara, this came up on the internet. See, there's the tuatara right there. Now, obviously, what is this picture trying to show you? Evolution. It's trying to show you the macroevolution, where the tuatara came from. I find this relatively interesting, if you will notice. Can you guys see that there's no branches to this tree? Everything individually comes down to this one common ancestor that they think everything came from. But do you see there's no links in between? It's just everybody comes out of it. It's because there's no evidence for this. And I just found that rather humorous. There's no connection between any of these things except for in their minds, and therefore they draw it like this. I just wanted to point that out to you because the evidence is lacking. So anyway, I thought it was interesting. Okay, then we get to squamata. Squamata would be your snakes and lizards. Why they can't separate these two is beyond me. I mean, I'd have given snakes serpentine or something over here like this, and given the lizards, you know, lizard rama or something, I don't know. Anyway, but they didn't. They didn't ask me. So if you turn to page 500, you see what differs between these, and that's what your list is here. Lizards have 2 pairs of limbs. They got legs. They got 4 legs. Snakes don't. Okay? Lizards have ears and can hear. Snakes don't. I'm sorry. Lizards have the same type of scales over most of their bodies. Snakes don't. It just, you know, it keeps coming up. And most lizards have eyelids to close their eyes. Snakes don't. I'm sorry, that's about how it strikes me. It's like, okay. So let's do lizards first. The lizards, it told us first about the iguana, which you guys are painfully aware of, so I didn't belabor that. There are different kinds of iguanas besides what we have running loose here as an exotic invasive species. Excuse me. There are marine iguanas and other iguanas that they don't live here. But anyway, we do have a lot of iguanas, so we'll kind of skip over those. What do you say? Then you get to the Komodo dragon. And the Komodo dragon is a really large lizard. It says it's the world's largest lizard. It gets up to 10 feet long. Their mouth is so nasty. How nasty is it? Their mouth is so nasty that when they chase something down to eat it, they bite it and then they back off and let it go die from the infection, and then they go back and eat it. Gross. So they are really nasty as far as I'm concerned. I do not like the whole picture of a Komodo dragon. And then we have geckos, and geckos are cool. Now that's a little gecko like what we have around here, but you guys are probably aware that people buy leopard geckos and all these other cool geckos that you can buy in the store, and they get all colorful, and oh no, they're really kind of pretty. My parents have a gecko that's obviously was somebody's pet and got loose because it's about that long. It's in the Keys. It's about that long, and seriously, it is polka dotted. It is a seriously polka dotted with pink and brown polka dots. Seriously a pretty creature, okay? And so it had to be somebody's pet that got loose. But geckos, I don't know if you know this, they sound like this. Gecko! Gecko! Have you ever heard them? First time, yes, that's where they got the name gecko, I swear it. They say gecko. Gecko! And the first time I'm in the Keys and I hear this thing, I wake up the next morning, I say to my parents, who got a goat? Did one of your neighbors get a goat? Doesn't that sound like a goat? My parents are looking at me like, what do you mean a goat? You know, they're in Isla Morada. I mean, I go, didn't you hear him? Gecko! They go, that's the gecko. And I'm like, oh. So the next night, when it came out, they actually took me over with a flashlight and showed it to me, and it was making all that noise. Okay, the bigger ones, they actually make that weird gecko noise. I know. And they can walk on glass upside down. Now, you read about that, and that is such a cool design feature. Their little toes are different, and they can walk upside down on glass. And the reason is because on their feet, it's full of little hairs. And it said something like 5 million hairs per square inch. Let's just see. Yes, 5 million per square inch. That's just totally weird. I don't know my name half the time, but I remembered that. That was pretty good. So 5 million hairs per square inch, and each of those hairs end in thousands of little endings. Look at that. Look. I thought this was such a cool picture because it showed all of this. And so each of those end in little endings, which means, oh my goodness, the surface area that God got in that is amazing. Now, why is that so important? Because molecules, depending on the surface area they have, and you guys haven't learned this in chemistry or anything yet, but molecules will actually be attracted to one another by something called van der Waals forces. So the more molecules that you have exposed to each other, the stronger the van der Waals forces. So literally, the way that the gecko's foot is designed, he can walk across glass on the ceiling because the molecules themselves are holding him up there. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? I mean, serious stuff. And it said that they're trying to make tape out of this, and this is actually Gecko Grip, okay? And this man is hanging from the ceiling in his classroom showing how the, maybe it's not a classroom, maybe this is actually at the business where they developed it in Germany. They look kind of German to me. But anyway, I think that's where it actually was developed, in Germany. But actually, that is that Gecko Grip. Now, they say it's still not as good as the gecko's foot because the gecko can just walk across there and keep doing it and keep doing it, whereas the tape, after it's used a couple times, it won't work anymore, like tape, you know. But it's still pretty neat. So they used the technology to try to come up with something that we could use. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then there is the Chameleon. And I don't know if any chameleon can do that color. But what I will tell you is this. I have a friend whose daughter used to have chameleons, and she wanted to breed chameleons. And so when the chameleon's happy, they turn this beautiful tealy color, you know, bluish green. I mean, it was really pretty. They could turn all sorts of pretty colors. But anytime she brought the male chameleon near the female didn't like the male. And she would turn black. As soon as she saw the male, black. And that cracked me up because I thought every woman should have that trait and then men would be safer. We'd either be teal or pretty, and then if we were in a bad mood, your husband come home and go, oh, she's black, I'm out of here. You know? And I don't mean that beautiful ebony black like some of our sisters and brothers have. I mean like this kind of black. You know? So anyway, I just found that interesting. So they're able to do all sorts of different colors, and you guys are familiar with that. What's really cool about them is their tongue. Their tongue is actually, they can extend it out longer than their body. Thus the picture. It's sticky on the end, so whatever they hit sticks and they can pull it back in. And did you get that their tongue accelerates at 50 Gs? 50 times the acceleration due to gravity? 50 Gs? I mean, now that's a tongue that's moving, okay? People say, I talk too much. I mean, that's a tongue that's really moving, all right? And so we're told here that fighter pilots pass out at 10 Gs, and this tongue can move at 50 Gs. Okay, so pretty good. Anyway, so that's the chameleon. And then the horned toad, which has other names now, I've noticed, and there's several different types of horned toads, but they got these horns around the back of his head here. Somebody tell me, what is his defense mechanism that he uses?
That's words.
No, that's cute. No, actually, he squirts blood out of his eyes. And so anything that's looking at him, if he's scared, he squirts blood out of his eyes, and everybody looks at him and goes, oh, something's defective with you. I don't think I want to eat you. And the horned toad goes away and says, yeah, that worked. So anyway, okay. And then the last lizard that's listed there is the Gila Monster. And that is the only native venomous lizard in the United States that's native, I should say, okay? And they get about 2 feet long, and the tuatara only get about 2.5 feet long. So they're not real big. And I say that because you live in a place where we get iguanas, and iguanas can get ridiculously long, can't they? 6, 7 feet, no problem. Oh, yeah. When I was a kid here, we had a 6-foot iguana and as a pet, and then we gave him to the zoo because he really got too big for all the cages we had. So yeah, they get big. And then some of them, it just said, can get up to 10 feet long. But I've seen a lot of 6-footers. Now that's counting their tail, that's not just their body, okay? So, okay. Anyway, so that was our lizard excursion. Now we'll do snakes. You ready? Ready for snakes? Okay. So, he's got kind of strange scales, doesn't he? Do you see how different his scales are? Pretty weird. Okay,